Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is extricate, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Luis. Luis, thank you so much for this suggestion. Now, let's spend a moment and talk about what this verb means. The verb extricate really just has a single meaning, and that is to free someone or something from some type of constraint or some type of difficulty. So a constraint might be something keeping a person stuck or confined to a particular area. For now, you should know that extricate is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E on the end because we have a verb that ends in the pattern vowel consonant E. Then we'll add an ing ending. That forms extricating. The past tense and the participle form of our verb just require us to add the letter D since this verb already ends in an E. Now our base verb, extricate, ends in a T sound. This means when I add the ed ending, I am going to add an extra syllable to the verb. I'm going to make an id sound. So the past tense and the participle form of our verb should sound like this: extricated, extricated. Okay. Now, there is a very common phrasal verb that we will see with this. Um, as I looked for examples in recent media, I almost always saw our verb being used as a phrasal verb. And the phrasal verb is to extricate from. So again, we're either freeing someone, something, maybe oneself from something else. So an example of this in a in a sentence might be, how did you extricate yourself from that awful date? So here, maybe we have some friends chatting about dating experience. Someone's telling them what a horrible experience they're having. And here they sort of want to know, how did you get free? How did you get out of this situation? Because it maybe sounds so bad that you wouldn't want to sort of see it through, maybe even the plans. You wanted to get yourself out of that situation as fast as you can. So now let's continue using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the past perfect and the present perfect. Let's start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about completed actions. But what makes it different than just the simple past tense is that we're really stressing that this particular action occurred before a certain point in the past or before another action. The name of the verb tense, past perfect, has two letter P's, and that can help you remember that you need to make or have two parts to make the verb. So here we'll be using a past form of have, which is had, and then we'll be using the participle form of the verb. So in the affirmative, it doesn't matter what our subject is, we're always going to follow this pattern: subject, had, and then the participle. Let's take a look at an example sentence. The two people aboard the aircraft when it crashed had extricated themselves by the time emergency crews arrived. So I borrowed this sentence from a newspaper article talking about a small airplane crash and how these two people were able to kind of get themselves out and freed from the wreckage. And here, again, past perfect is being used to note that their freeing themselves occurred before emergency crews arrived. Now let's talk about making negative past perfect sentences. To do this, you start with a subject, you use had not, and then the participle. You might also see the contraction hadn't, and then the participle. Let's take a look at another example. He wondered why his father hadn't extricated him and his sister from such a dangerous environment. Again, another sentence I saw recently where someone was sort of sharing what a challenging and difficult childhood they had, particularly because this person's mother was an alcoholic, had a very serious addiction to drinking, and many dangerous things resulted. And this person now as an adult is thinking back on that time and sort of asking, like, why didn't our dad get us out of this dangerous environment? Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, start with had, then you're going to have your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. And again, this is a regular verb, so past tense and the participle are the same thing. So here's the last past perfect example. It says, had they extricated them from the hog barn before calling 911? So as I looked for real life examples of this verb, it was used time and time again, um, related to stories or reports of kind of dangerous, catastrophic events. So I think this was a particular story where a barn started to collapse. There were people inside. And again, we're kind of wanting to know, were they able to get out and get free? Now let's move on and talk about the present perfect. We can use this verb tense in a couple different ways. One way to use it is to describe things that occurred in the past, but at an unknown point in the past. This is sometimes called the indefinite past tense. Or we can use it to describe an action that started in the past and is continuing into the present. To make this verb tense, again, you'll notice two P's, so present perfect. That means we need two parts to make our verb. And because we'll be using the present form of have, we must pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we want to use have and then our participle form of the verb. But if the subject is he, she, or it, we'll use has and the participle form of the verb. Let's take a look at our first example. Crews have extricated a worker who was trapped under rocks in the basement of a home. Again, I hope these sentences aren't too scary or depressing for everyone who is watching, but this is really how we see this being used. Again, people in dangerous situations and hopefully reports of them being freed. Now, let's look at negative present perfect. Again, to do this, I've got to pay attention to my subject. I'm either going to use have not in the participle form of the verb or has not and then the participle form. And again, the subject is dictating which one I should use. Here's another example. The producer hasn't extricated himself completely from mainstream pop. Now, this usage, again, a real, authentic piece of writing that came from someone else, was sort of talking about how this person was sort of looking to kind of grow and expand the kind of music that I think this person writes, sings, and produces. But what they're saying here is they're not completely free of what's called popular or pop music. Sometimes people look down on that a little bit, like it's not sophisticated or it's not as artistic as what's done to kind of become stuck in our head. But that article was noting this person isn't saying, I'm never going to do that kind of music. In fact, he has continued to do that type of music. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, you want to either start with have or has, whichever form matches the subject. The subject comes next, then use that participle form of the verb. Here's our last example. Has the company extricated itself from the business of skilled nursing facilities? So again, I was looking for real examples, and this was another instance where I was seeing either people or organizations sort of talking about getting out of certain types of services or lines of business. And this company was really trying to focus more on what's called assisted living communities rather than facilities that require much higher levels of care for the elderly and or disabled. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb. The first word we're going to discuss is the noun form. Okay, we're going to have a spelling change here, and we're going to pronounce this extrication. Extrication. This is the act or the process of freeing someone or something from some kind of entanglement, a difficulty, or a confinement. An example of this might be the firefighters are training in vehicle extrication drills all weekend. So, what this means is firefighters are practicing. What would we do to get someone out or freed from a vehicle after some type of accident? Right? So they're practicing how do we do that to cause as few injuries as possible, maybe do it as quickly as possible so the person can get medical treatment and it as safely as possible because we don't want our first responders getting injured or are hurt in this process either. We've got one more word for today. It's the adjective extricable. This is the act or the process, or really describing that act or process of freeing someone and talking about are we able to do it? So, an example of this might be if this happens, the food item might not be extricable in time to save the person from permanent brain injury or death. Now, I saw a sentence very similar to this describing how certain foods can be really difficult for older people to consume and maybe not so safe. So, we're kind of talking about gelatinous things, things that are kind of large and can sometimes get stuck in someone's throat. So, here, what they're talking about, these things can also be very difficult because I think the texture to them just makes them maybe a little more sticky. So using something like the Heimlich maneuver to try and force the item through them may not work. So that's what they're talking about. The food item might not be extricable. So able to be freed from some type of confinement. Thanks again to Luis for suggesting today's verb. I thank you all for watching. Have a great day.